Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 9th of November 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And, well, the weather, pretty gloomy. Most people are saying it's appalling. Wet and very windy in the Isle of Man. So no doubt the long tails will be taking cover in their little holes. Meanwhile, across the country, it's just not looking good. So I think we'll leave it there.
Yep.
What is the good news? Well, the good news is that Mr. Bercow is setting the clear priorities for the Conservative government. So never mind the unemployment, the demise of the NHS, the armed forces, child abuse, fraud and corruption with the international banks or unlawful wars. Mike, we're going to equip Parliament with transgender loos.
Good.
Do you think they'll have special provision for cocaine in there, which was another one of the parliamentarians' little vices, I think?
Vending machines, I'm sure.
Vending machines for coke. Well, there we are. Is that just nonsense? I'm going to say we don't think it is because, of course, this is completely distracting the public mind from the important issues. And what is this transgender agenda really about? It's about breaking down families, breaking down society. So this is not some side issue by Mr. Bercow. This is part of the plan to help break down Britain as a nation state. And of course, you've got to do that by attacking families and people's identities. Well, we can at least trust the spooks to look after us, I think, Mike,
well, indeed. This is a couple of ex-spooks anyway, Sir John Sawyers and Sir Ian Lubbin, and they're heading off to Gleneagles. This is quite a good article in The Guardian, and I do suggest people read it. They are heading off to address what is being called a top-tier audience of fund managers on the first evening of a high-profile conference sponsored by hedge funds and investment banks, according to The Guardian. Now, they go on to point out that, in particular, Sawyers has taken up 2 influential private sector jobs. The question I really had, Brian, because they produced this little wiring diagram, which, you know, it's very good that they seem to be jumping on the bandwagon, but they produced this little wiring diagram here showing the links between various ex-people and various vested interests. And the question I had for you really was, how is it possible that people with such high security clearances then go to become consultants for these types of companies, hedge funds and so on? Surely information leaks under those circumstances?
Well, it's not possible, is the answer, Mike. Under all the official secret rules, this is absolutely not possible. So what we've now got is flaunting that these people are clearly not under the control of the Official Secrets Act. They are clearly sharing information to do with Britain's security, to do with, they are sharing that information to these big money men. And you've got to ask what the purpose of that is. Well, I think the purpose is that we're actually seeing Britain's intelligence services privatised in its simplest and crudest sense. Treason, I think this is treason. These people need to be brought in front of a court and pretty quickly.
So The Guardian's saying that according to the website belonging to Macro Advisory Partners, these guys are going to be providing strategic insights.
Well, I'm sure they are, because what we're seeing at the moment is we've got this huge collection of data which is being used for everything from advertising to insurance to the state building up its database. We've got Cameron and Francis Maud boasting that this information is now being directly shared with the Israelis. So this is getting towards the end of the breakdown of the nation state, isn't it? Very, very dangerous indeed.
Well, events continue with regard to the Russian plane crash in Egypt. This is an article by Finian Cunningham, published by Sputnik over the weekend. And he's calling this troubling, darker questions. Was it really terrorists, or was it British MI6 agents palming the dead off as terrorists? So really asking the same kinds of questions we were asking last week. it was quite amazing, wasn't it, how David Cameron suddenly jumped on this bandwagon of it was a bomb before there was any evidence whatsoever for it. And this is the point that's being made in this article, that if he must have had some prior knowledge to be jumping on the bandwagon quite so soon, is really what's being hinted at here. Well, this is what we felt about it as well, isn't it?
Well, my feeling on this, Mike, was that this was likely to be a combined British and American ops in order to teach Putin a lesson for getting involved in Syria. That's just my personal theory. But Cameron suddenly leaping out saying it was a bomb. How did he know it was a bomb? Where did that information come from? Well, I tweeted something out 3 days ago. Let's have a look at that. This was my tweet. Sorry to be cynical, but shouldn't Fat Cat at GCHQ UK already know who brought down the Russian jet? Go on, you know, don't you? Interesting, I put the Fat Cat bit in there, Mike. A little bit of anticipation. We now know that this is true because we got GCA mixed. Well, 3 days later, I was able to say this, as predicted 3 days ago at GCHQ UK, and Intel hear Brit jihadis laughing. Of course they did. Brit-backed good terrorists, government black ops pantomime. Well, what I was trying to say in my 144 characters is that basically this is madness. We don't know anything about these terrorists. The next minute we hear them laughing after the event, but we don't know anything's going on before. Well, it gets better because it's pointed out to us that if you have a look at the Sun article here, we've got British jihadis in jet bomb link. Spies pick up their chatter about IS infiltrator at the airport minutes after the attack. Well, if you've just planned a bomb on an aircraft and you've done that in total secrecy, so GCHQ, CIA and all the rest of the other listening stations don't have an idea, are you going to be stupid enough to boast about it afterwards? I don't think so. But what do they say? It says the online chatter was picked up by US spy agencies in the first link between the attack and British extremists. So Cameron stands up on the world stage in advance of this and says, oh, well, it's definitely a bomb. And then all of a sudden we've got US spy agencies and they got London and Birmingham accents. So this is pretty good, isn't it? This can be used to ramp up the so-called terror threat in Britain. We're all going to be murdered in our beds by those nasty jihadists in Birmingham. I use the word a lot. This is dross, Mike.
I think we're much more likely to be murdered in our beds by that nasty jihadist Ian Duncan Smith.
Well, this is true. Have a look at the same concept against another article here, because this is the Mail Online. Extremists heard celebrating after Russian jet disaster, spoke with British accent. Spooks believe chatter detected moments after crash in Egypt, including jihadists who spoke with Birmingham and London voices. But now, of course, it changes because according to the Sunday Express, which is part of this article, the British accents were detected by GCHQ spooks, monitoring chatter between jihadists in the immediate aftermath of the crash. So the press getting a little bit mixed up here. We're not too sure whether this came from the Americans or GCHQ. Mail says it's GCHQ. Chatter, I think the whole lot is chatter. Bomb reel chatter. Complete nonsense. And if you don't like that one, well, have a look at this one here, because this is about a rocket attack on a UK tour jet. And as it says, pilot with 189 passengers dodged missile above Sharm el-Sheikh in August with just seconds to spare from disaster. Now, if we're to believe this article, this passenger aeroplane dodged a missile. Apparently the missile came within 1,000 feet of the aircraft. Well, of course, it didn't dodge anything. Either the missile wasn't heading for the aircraft, the plane was not going to be dodging a missile, but that's what the Mail reporter would have us believe, that they took evasive action after the pilot spotted the missile speeding through the air. He moved the joystick and that was the problem solved. But in that article, of course, it now mixes things because we have the same expression. According to The Sun, British extremists were discussing details of the plot in online chatter. Now, they were actually still talking about the bomb plot, but if you read this article quickly, this chatter business was being reinforced in your mind. And I think this is the nudging, this is the psychological implanting of a story which is the political story, it's not the truth.
It's nudging on many, many levels. It's
Yeah.
persuading us of the dangers of these jihadists. It's trying to persuade us that GCHQ is doing a valuable job in protecting us from these nasty jihadists, and therefore we shouldn't worry about the new Investigatory Powers Act.
All the meetings with the bankers in Gleneagle.
Right.
And what's Theresa May been telling us? Well, we need all these security services because apparently they've saved us from 6 attacks. The one thing we never see is any actual evidence that there was a plot, there was an attack, and we certainly see no evidence that any attack was foiled. But of course, we can't be told that because that's all security matters and we really don't need to know. Dross.
Okay, Crane Report is back in the studio tonight. So Crane Report at 7:30, and he will have as a special guest Max Egan. And they'll be discussing the recent warning, his recent warning following his presentations at the Freedom Summit's events in Byron Bay in Australia. And of course, we're talking about the fact that Max Egan was attacked physically recently. And then for Fracking Nightmare at 9 p.m, we will have Vera Scroggins on from Pennsylvania talking about the latest efforts to shut her up, basically. Now, it's going to be interesting to see whether tonight we have a further appearance of the what's the word? Bailiffs. Thank you. Of the bailiffs who are wanting to serve some papers on Ian. So the last time Ian was in the studio, we had a bailiff at the door. Let's see what happens tonight.
Trespassing, I think the word was.
No, I have to say he did trespass, but as soon as he was informed that he was trespassing, he left and stood outside on the street. So far they have been well behaved, but let's see whether they turn up tonight, and let's see whether they're still as well behaved.
Okay, well, just a couple of words on discussions in the UK column chat box. A couple of people have remarked in relation to the Russian jet bombing that it's remarkable that these jihadists would have been chatting away in a nice Brummie English or a London English accent. Surely they would have been discussing it in Arabic or some other language, which I think is a pretty good point. But it fits the story better if they've got a nice Brummie accent, because then you know they're British, they live in Birmingham, and they're going to murder us all.
Yeah,
so
let's not forget that Clash of Civilizations policy is based on the idea that you don't know who your enemies could be who your enemies are, could be your next door neighbour. I think I know who our enemies are, and this might sum them up. So here we are, David Cameron in the centre there. This is back in July. David Cameron appointed his new business advisory group that included more than a dozen chief executives of various UK companies. So we had the chief executives of BP, Legal & General, EasyJet, Land Securities, London Stock Exchange, Persimmon, Asda, Arm, Severn Trent. Now let's remember, Severn Trent was the company last week whenever the National Grid asked for some extra energy, decided that every megawatt hour of that extra energy should cost £2,500 instead of the normal £60. So this is the type of person that David Cameron has advising him, in inverted commas.
it's the same sort of people that are now working with GCHQ. Is that my imagination? It's the corporatists, the big money people.
Absolutely. So we've got, for example, Bob Dudley, chief executive of BP. Well, he's got to be there for the fracking agenda. We've got Nigel Wilson, chief executive of Legal & General. I wonder, is he there to worry about
child abuse
claims?
Yeah.
We've got Xavier Rollet, chief executive of London Stock Exchange. As I said, we've got Caroline McCall, who's chief executive of EasyJet. Paul Walsh, chairman of Compass Group. Robert Knoll, chief executive of Land Securities, and Anna Botten, chairwoman of Santander, that well-known, honest banking group which doesn't launder money at all. But so why are we mentioning this? Because while President Xi was here, we missed this one. I just wanted to bring it to everybody's attention, and that was that David Cameron has now hired a new puppet master, who's Jack Ma, who of course was the chief executive and is now the chairman of Alibaba. Jack Ma, considered the richest person in China. A billionaire, a philanthropist, of course, because they all are philanthropists, aren't they? And selected by the World Economic Forum as a young global leader. So he ticks all the boxes. He was, as I mentioned, he is a philanthropist and was selected by Forbes Asia as one of Asia's heroes of philanthropy. So he is one of the real global world servers, perhaps, a real player globally. And so why is he there? Well, I think he's partly there to give David Cameron his marching orders, along with all the other people in that group. But as well as that, I think there's a bit of something going back in the other direction, because of course David Cameron wants to know how best to infiltrate China.
Well, they're going to do that with common purpose. They are doing it with common purpose, Mike. This is what the program is about. It's what these global leaders are about. And we are supposed to just sit back and watch these people selected and being appointed to positions of power. We should relax, safe in the knowledge that they're philanthropy. Would you say that?
Yes.
Thank you. With our best interests at heart.
Yeah.
That word gave me a few problems, actually. I was trying to smile at the same time.
Well, somebody else with our best interests at heart, no doubt, is Michael Gove. And he and Cameron, of course, and Osborne have announced 9 new prisons, because we don't have enough prison capacity. Clearly, they're intending to put lots more people in prison in the not too distant future. 9 new prisons, but this apparently is part of a prison building revolution and a new prison reform program. And what they're saying is that, of course, Victorian prisons have dark corners where nasty things go on, like drug dealing and assaults and so on, and they want to design out these dark corners and make sure that this stuff can't happen. Maybe this is coming in time for the smoking ban, which is about to be imposed on prisoners in the UK. I'm sure that's going to do a lot to calm things down in prisons in Britain. But of course, massive overcrowding in many places in prisons, and they're going to build 9 new prisons. This is great infrastructure development here, isn't it?
I wonder whether G4S will be getting involved in that, Mike, of course, because it's now emerging into the public domain, as they say, that G4S, one of the big shareholders, just happens to be Theresa May's husband.
No.
Apparently so. We can check this, but I believe that's the case. So
does this explain why a company which is proven to be fraudulent and run contracts fraudulently with the government continues to get more and more government contracts?
Well, that would be insider dealing, I think, wouldn't it? Or something like that.
Yes.
Well, we'll look into that a bit more, but we believe this is the case, so perhaps our researchers and viewers and listeners might give us some assistance on that. Well, if we're building more prisons, of course, we're unlikely to see any of the Crown prosecution staff in them. Why we're interested in that? Well, this is the headline from a couple of days ago. CPS fined 200,000 over theft of interview film laptops. Now, I encourage people to go and read this BBC article, because it's what it doesn't say, which is very interesting. Now, what is this whole thing about? Well, it's about the fact that the CPS handed out videos of abuse survivors giving evidence to Manchester police, and they went to a very strange little organisation. There was a burglary and they disappeared. So the CPS was apparently aware of the graphic and distressing nature of the personal data contained in the videos, but was complacent in protecting that information. Now, this is the comment from the Information Commissioner, who's actually fined them. So the ICO here says laptops were recovered after 8 days and the burglar apprehended. They're not aware of anyone else accessing the material. We're not too sure whether that means it was accessed or not. We're going to have a look at this in a bit more detail, so stay with us on this one. The Times had originally reported the crime, theft of video interviews of sex abuse victim leads to CPS investigation. Sounds a powerful thing, doesn't it? The CPS investigating, but of course it was investigating itself, so it all got a little bit squidgy. Well, the Manchester Evening News is a good source of information on this. Data protection watchdogs to launch probe into theft of computers containing police video interviews of alleged abuse victims. And the footage, as it said, was stolen during a break-in. Now, this is where it gets interesting. Spokesman said investigators would be talking to all parties involved. We're aware of the incident, making inquiries. And here's the name of the company which the BBC decided to leave out in the latest report, Swan Films. And it says it offers audio-visual services based at Winstay Grove in Fallowfield. This is Manchester area. They use other premises. And the Manchester Evening News had repeatedly tried to talk to Swan Films, but all they got was one man answering the phone number listed on the internet, and he refused to answer any questions. So just remember that little bit. Here is the other side, of course, the CPS. CPS quickly boasted it had secured all material which remained at the burgled premises. They're now asking for an urgent explanation of the security measures in place, so they now shift the blame from the CPS over to Swan Films. They said they're working with the police to identify the victims and witnesses. And here's the Greater Manchester Police spokeswoman saying that at 2:20 September the 11th, 2014, police were called to reports of a burglary and investigations were ongoing. Now, of course, remember this is Alison Saunders losing very, very important abuse testimonies given to the police. Same lady who actually can put Melanie Shaw, an abuse victim, in prison. So you lose the evidence, but you're pretty good at getting the victims of the abuse in prison. Well, let's have a look at a UK column wiring diagram, as we like to call it. So this is how it went. Swan Films in Manchester were apparently been used by the Crown Prosecution Service since 2002. You can find the address online. And the important thing is that no company details appear. This appears to be a one-man operation, but it is not clear from the research we were able to do. What we will say to people is it does not appear to be the same company as Swan Films, based in London, which is a pretty substantial company, which is assisting the BBC in a very big way. We couldn't find any links between them, and some months ago when we did speak to Swan Films in London, they said it's not us. But remarkable that Swan should be quite a popular name with these film companies. So what happens? Well, here we are, video footage linked to 31 investigations containing dozens of victims giving sexual and violent offences evidence to Manchester Police is sent by the Crown Prosecution to Swan on the 1st of August 2014. Now, they were doing this without any of the proper protections. This stuff was just sort of being handed and carried on buses. On the 11th of September, footage is stolen from Wilmslow Road Flat, one of the owners of Swan Films Manchester. Now, it says owners. We're not sure who those owners are. We spoke to the Crown Prosecution Service this morning and said, was your contract with a company or individuals? Quick as a flash, they haven't responded to us. The Manchester Evening News tried to contact Swan Films, as we've said, in Winstay Grove, but whoever answered the phone wouldn't comment. What we can tell you is the testimonies included those connected to Jimmy Savile and Stuart Hall. So this was all pretty timely, Mike, at the time the investigations were going on into Savile and Stuart Hall, just a coincidence. And this is where it is also interesting. They say 6 men were arrested. We can't find any record of who's actually gone to court.
No.
If you'd like to do some research yourself as a viewer or listener, here's b99.co.uk business directory giving some information about that Manchester address. Note it says Swan Films. Who are they talking about? We don't know. So what's now happened? Well, Crown Prosecution Service has made a bit of a mistake. Nothing to worry about, Mike. Critical evidence now in the hands of people who could threaten abuse victims, a little bit of blackmail, but nothing too important. So the ICO has stepped in. They fined them £200,000. But of course, where does their money come from? Well, it's public money. And the public also fund the CPS. And then the CPS have been fined £200,000 of public money, which apparently gets returned to the public purse. So none of the staff in the Crown Prosecution Service seem to be brought to book at all.
No, and this is typical, isn't it, where fines, the headline says a fine has been issued, but it's a fine issued to a public organisation and the money goes back into the Treasury,
so
where
this
it
is
just gets
complete
recycled
nonsense.
back to the public organisation again. It's absolute nonsense.
So we just put in that public money funds a not fit for purpose CPS. The CPS fails and it uses public money to pay the fine. And then the head, Alison Saunders, gets off totally scot-free. Can we add a bit to this? Well, let's see what the CPS said. They said the incident was a matter of real regret. It's vital that victims of crime feel confident that breaches like this will not happen. And following a full review, that's the CPS reviewing itself, we've strengthened the arrangements for the safe and secure handling of sensitive material. Well, have they? Where's the evidence of it? No evidence at all. So abuse survivors have been given a public message that their data is unsafe with the police and the Crown Prosecution Service. Survivors frightened off. I'm going to say job done. And let's remember exactly the same thing happening with Goddard's CSA inquiry. Lose the data. So you're giving the survivors a message that their data's unsafe and they get frightened off. Now, why should all this be going on? Well, we can go back to a clue in the Metro. This was talking about Manchester. Paedophiles walk free because arresting them is too difficult. Well, it's too difficult because the trail leads to Westminster and senior people in the British establishment. So this is a former detective who said she'd written a report more than 10 years ago giving details of sex abuse by gangs of Asian men against young white girls. The names of victims and offenders were included, but there was a lack of desire to investigate. We were told by a policeman a little while ago that failure to investigate a crime is a crime, so it's more than a lack of desire, I think, Mike.
Indeed. 6
years later, another detective voiced concerns that the problem had begun to spiral out of control. Well, who was responsible? Sir Peter Fahey, Chief Constable of Greater Manchester.
Was he not in some controversy recently with regard to child pornography himself?
I hadn't. If I had heard that, Mike, I've forgotten. But
I think people should read the Rotherham Common Purpose Effect article on the UK Column website, and perhaps his name crops up.
Could that be while he retired after 34 years?
I couldn't comment.
No, okay. No. Well, more research required on that, and we'll check up on it ourselves. But Exaro picking up on some of this, interestingly. So Exaro here saying that the CSA child abuse inquiry was now a lawyer fest, where they were going to recruit, they believe, a total of 21 barristers. So plenty of money there, Mike. And this comment says it all. This is an abuse survivor, Esther Baker. They are trying to terrify anyone that has experienced harm from people, including the judicial system, into staying quiet. So this lady is giving it spot on, isn't she? This is the game. Lose the data, frighten the people with the evidence. Nobody comes forward. And this is the headline here, that there's been a couple of mishaps they're described as. So the CSA inquiry lost date, only a mistake, just a little bit of a mishap.
Mishap.
Yeah. So while they lose the data, a little bit of a mishap, let's remind ourselves that the Crown Prosecution Service, of course, are very good at prosecuting abuse victims. No sympathy there for any mistake from a victim. Let's get him, put them in prison. And of course, look at that cluster of people as one example who were happy to put Melanie Shaw in prison. So I've said, welcome to the asylum where lies become truth. This is the state of the nation.
Indeed. Well, speaking of prison, Chris Coverdale, long-time anti-war campaigner, and has been arguing for many, many years. I think he was at the first or possibly the second British Constitution Group conference talking about this very subject. He's been arguing for many years that if we pay tax, we are contributing to terrorism globally. And so he's been trying to take a stand on this. And the easiest way for him to do that was to withhold council tax. Unfortunately, last week he was jailed for 42 days at Hastings Magistrates Court because he continues to refuse to pay. And the judge said, having heard from you that you're refusing to pay this on the basis that it is unlawful, despite being told that it is not the case. Sorry, that is not the case. So in other words, he had been told at a previous hearing, the judiciary had assured him it was perfectly lawful to pay tax.
So this is taxpayers' money being used for unlawful wars. This is genocide, the murder of people, loss of limbs in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Libya, and of course now going on in Syria. So no lawful mandate, paid for by the British taxpayer. And when you say you're not assisting terrorism, they put you in prison.
Indeed. So, as I say, he had been refusing. He is now in prison. Anybody would like to contact Chris, he's an HMP Lewis, 1 Brighton Road, Lewis, East Sussex, BN7 1EA. His prisoner number is A1279DP. There is a Facebook campaign page for this. There is a petition on change.org. If you'd like to support, write to him, sign the petition, support in any way that you can, is really the message here.
Can I just say, Mike, it's interesting, Lewis Prison there, we had a gentleman come to see us quite a few months ago with a story about being imprisoned there, where when he went into the prison there was no formal check-in procedure, so he never was checked in, no details taken. He was left in a cell in diesel-soaked overalls for a number of days, until even other prisoners were saying, why are you still in that dress, that former dress? And then one morning at about 6 o'clock, 6:30, his cell door was unlocked and he's just told, you're out. So he was pushed from his cell straight out on the streets with no checkout procedure. And if people are saying this can't be true, I assure you it was true. And of course, during that gentleman's time in prison, he was told by one of the other warders, your problem is that you are one of Mr. X's special boys. I think these are known as black prisoners. So interesting, Lewis Prison there, where they've...
Is Lewis a private prison?
I don't know the answer to that. We'll have a look at that. But I know that there's certainly some very dubious things going on there.
It's certainly becoming a debtor's prison, it seems. But anyway, okay, let's move on to various things. TPP, of course, has been filling the headlines in various places since it was announced and since the text came out. Médecins Sans Frontières have made an official statement on this, and it's pretty hard-hitting. They're saying that TPP is a bad deal for medicine. It's bad for humanitarian medical treatment providers such as MSF, and it's bad for people who need access to affordable medicines across the world, including in the United States. Now, it's quite staggering, by the way, just as a quick aside, what's going on in the United States at the moment, because we have total demoralization in many, many parts of the country. There's a massive heroin epidemic going on and associated suicides. People are dying in their hundreds in some cities, and I'm not exaggerating this. It is pretty horrendous. So Médecins Sans Frontières, absolutely right to highlight the United States in its comments. And so they go on, and there has been much discussion about TPP in the media, the fraught politics of TPP, the worst thing Harper did for Canada, and so on. And of course, climate change is one of the subjects which is part and parcel of the discussion. And there seems to be an effort to focus the discussion on the climate change issue. Well, we've got the World Bank. Climate change issue is at the front of the political agenda at the moment because of the Paris conference, which is coming up at the end of this month. But really, the focus of TPP on climate change is an effort to prevent people from discussing some of the other aspects of it. But anyway, rapid climate-informed development needed to keep climate change from pushing more than 100 million people into poverty by 2030. So this is global warming, elevating disease, ravaging crops, and pushing 100 million more people into poverty without action to prevent it, which is what the World Bank is saying. And really pushing this message. Now, we've been hearing this message for how many years now? Certainly over a decade. All kinds of doom and gloom messages with regard to climate change, which never seem to have happened. But they are really starting to push it now. TPP is part of that. Now, alongside this, we have just had the end of the Open Government Partnership Global Summit, which was in Mexico. And of course, climate change was a big part of that. And they're saying that, the United Nations warning that carbon cutting pledges go nowhere near far enough. And so they were talking about this issue. They were also talking about the cities issue, it won't surprise you to know. And open government, of course, absolutely part and parcel of bringing these agendas through. So this was a series of workshops, panel discussions, plenaries, and social gathering to share experiences from respective countries and provide real examples of how government openness can improve public services, drive economic growth, reduce poverty, and make governments more accountable. And of course, pushing the global warming agenda and sustainable development goals. Naturally, now the main sustainable development goal that they were talking about here was goal 16: peace, justice, and strong institutions, responsive, inclusive, participatory, and representative decision-making at all levels, all the buzzwords in there. And they were absolutely talking about the smart cities in smarter ways, and the fact that so many of the world's poor are going to be living in cities in the not too distant future. I just thought we would throw up who the sponsors of this event are, because it is the usual suspects. The World Bank right in the center there, of course, Microsoft, Cisco, Oracle, the types of companies that are involved in bringing the Internet of Things and the smart grid into operation. This is all part and parcel of the same policy agenda: sustainable development, smart grids, cities, Agenda 21. And TPP is one part of that as well.
City regions, with areas of the cities for dissenters. We saw that in one document, didn't we?
Yes.
I think Jonathan Porritt was involved in that document. So if you're not sure what we're talking about to do with Agenda 21 and the change into what Mike's described as a medieval feudal city region system, get researching, because the UN policy is being drifted into British policy very quickly indeed. Well, we're going to end on a little statement, really, which came from Martin. We thought it was particularly good. I'll read it through, as the text's a little bit small. But thank you for sending this to us. It's about we the people. It says, we the people are being harvested for our money, our work, our compliance to the law, our goodwill. Anything that could be monetized is exploited, and in such a way to disempower resistance. We, the people, are considered nothing more than fodder. Government is Antoinesque. Politics is broken. Democracy is dead. Parliament is not fit for purpose. Government has become the enemy of the people. The government is corrupt. The corruption is absolute, led from the top down and out of control. Being rotten to the core, and from the core, everything it touches it taints. Having neither the will nor ability to change, outside intervention is indicated. Any persons who fail to act appropriately when faced with corruption or condone in any way the actions of those determined as corrupt become, by definition, corrupt themselves. There comes a time when, for the sake of humanity, society and civilization, It is not only the choice of a person to throw out corrupt governance, but a duty. The banksters are but one part of the establishment that depends upon corruption to exist. The inextricable entanglement is both endemic and systemic. It is those in power who are the terrorists, having destroyed our society from within. Well, Martin, that was a pretty powerful statement. We're very pleased to read it out. I'd only just add that we haven't yet been destroyed, but we can see the pace of change. That's what the change is about. Destroying the country is quickening, and it is up to us to do something about it. So UK Column's going to say once again, don't sit back and watch what's happening. The big two weapons that you've got are truth and exposure. So get out there, spread the word, talk to your friends, family, colleagues, and any other members of the public you can get at, particularly professionals, police, very important, but spread the word as to what's really happening in the country, and that is we are being attacked by our own government. I think we should end there, really, Mike.
Yep. See you at 7:30 tonight for the Korean Report and 9 o'clock for Fracking Nightmare, ukcolumn.org/live.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.